Chapter 10. Unpleasant Councilman. "Ned ill?" Nancy repeated. "I must go in and see him." Mr. Drew put a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder and shook his head. "We don't know what the trouble is yet, and it may be contagious. What you can do is telephone Dr. Black and ask him if he can come over at once." She disliked the idea of waking the physician so early, but realized her father would not have made the request unless it was an emergency. In a few seconds, Nancy was speaking with Dr. Black. "This is Nancy Drew, Dr. Black. My friend Ned Nickerson is visiting us. He has suddenly become very ill. Would it be possible for you to come right over so that we'll know what to do?" "I'll be there in a little while," the physician replied. After he arrived, Nancy and Hannah waited downstairs. The housekeeper said suddenly, "Ned might have food poisoning. I've tried to serve only wholesome meals, but maybe Nancy interrupted to assure her that the cooking was not the cause of Ned's illness. All of them had eaten the same food, and none of the others had become ill. She wondered, however, if some of the supper she had prepared at the Thurstons had been spoiled. Nancy dismissed the thought upon recalling that she had shared the identical meal. When she told this to Hannah, the housekeeper said, "Then all I can conclude is that, even though I'm not superstitious, Ned must have been jinxed at the Thurston farm." Her remark startled Nancy. She went to the telephone to find out how Oscar was feeling after the attack upon him and Ned. He answered the phone at once and assured Nancy that he felt quite well. "Evidently I suffered no ill effects from what happened yesterday. I'm about to go out and work with the birds." Nancy said goodbye. What can be the matter with Ned? She asked herself. Just then the door to Ned's room opened. Mr. Drew came out, followed by Dr. Black. As they reached the foot of the stairs, Nancy asked, "Please tell me about Ned. How is he?" While patting her on the shoulder, the physician answered, "He's a pretty sick boy, Nancy, but I believe I know what's causing the trouble, and with correct treatment, he'll improve quickly." Dr. Black went on to say that he suspected Ned was suffering from an attack of ornithosis, a disease which is carried by sick birds. "I understand from your father that Ned's been in contact with some at the Thurston farm. I'm having tests made at the lab, and I'll let you know." Instantly, Nancy offered to play nurse for Ned. The doctor shook his head. "If it is ornithosis, it's quite contagious. All of you might easily catch it. I shall see about having Ned removed to a hospital." Hannah Gruen stepped forward. "Please don't do that. I'll put on a surgeon's mask and take care of Ned myself." "Where are Ned's parents?" Dr. Black asked. "In Europe," Nancy replied. "Oh, Dad, please let Ned stay here." Mr. Drew smiled, but said emphatically, "We'll have Dr. Black decide that." "I'll let you know," the physician replied. He left the house, carrying his doctor's kit. Nancy turned to her father. "Dad, you've been exposed to Ned. I hope you don't get sick." The tall, handsome lawyer grinned. "I'm in tip-top shape, Nancy," he said, thumping his chest. He put an arm around his daughter. "Please stop worrying." This was not easy for Nancy to do. She said nothing more, however, and went into the kitchen to help Hannah prepare breakfast. During the meal, Mr. Drew and Hannah took turns going upstairs to peek at Ned. They reported that he was asleep. When the telephone rang, Nancy hastened to answer it. Dr. Black was calling with his report. "Your friend Ned definitely has ornithosis," he stated. "I will have medication sent over at once. It's an antibiotic which should alleviate the virus immediately. Nancy, I think you should inform the Thurstons about Ned's symptoms." "I'll give him a ring at once and tell him," Nancy promised. She put in a second call to the farm. To her relief, Mr. Thurston told her he had already disposed of the lifeless birds and thoroughly sprayed the cages with disinfectant. "Fortunately, none of the other birds have been affected," he said, "and Roush reports that all the animals in the zoo are okay." Nancy felt relieved. "Oh, I'm glad." After hearing about Ned's condition, Oscar told her to give the young man his best wishes. "Tell him how sorry I am he picked up the virus at my bird farm. I'm wondering," he went on, "if by any chance the intruder deliberately infected the birds in order to make us believe we're jinxed." "That's a possibility," Nancy remarked. "In any case, it's a shame you had to lose all those beautiful birds." Nancy said she assumed it would be safe now for her, Bess, and George to help with the cleaning and feeding of the healthy birds. Oscar gladly accepted her offer. As soon as Nancy finished talking to him, she called Bess, then George. Both were astounded to hear her report about Ned. "Since I'm not allowed to help take care of him," said Nancy, "how about the three of us pitching in at the Thurston farm?" The cousins eagerly agreed to go. On the way, the girls decided to buy some groceries and prepare a couple of meals for the Thurstons. When they arrived at the farm, they again found Martha Thurston in her wheelchair. After a quick, pleasant greeting, the woman began to relate a terrible dream about a giant bulldozer coming on their property, knocking over all the buildings, and letting the birds fly away. "You were overtired yesterday," Nancy said to her kindly. "That's why you dreamed last night. Try to forget the whole thing. We'll show you what we brought. Then we'll go out to the cages and help your husband." The woman was very much pleased with the gift of meats and vegetables and an angel cake. The visitors put the articles away, then headed for the backyard. When the work was finished, Oscar said, "You three are certainly good workers." "Thank you." While Bess and George prepared lunch, Nancy told Oscar about the conversation with Mr. Hinchcliffe. The bird owner was disappointed by the man's attitude, but said he still hoped the town council would vote in his favor. "You know, other farms are involved in various developments of Mr. Wright's, but none has a setup like mine." "I'm going to call on Councilman Ryan this afternoon," Nancy told him. "He owns the clothing store, doesn't he?" "Yes, he does." Oscar gazed into the distance before speaking again. Finally, he said, "I hope you won't find Mr. Ryan difficult." "Is he supposed to be?" Nancy asked, smiling. The man nodded. "He's a great bargainer, and in the town council meetings never budges from his original opinion. Nancy, I wish you luck. Actually, I believe you can handle him." Oscar chuckled. About 2:30, the three girls set off. When they reached the shopping center in Harper, they parked in front of the clothing store and went inside. Nancy asked for the proprietor and was told he was in his office on the balcony. "I guess it's all right for you to go up," said the young man who had answered her query. "Just knock." Nancy, Bess, and George ascended the stairway, with Nancy in the lead. She knocked on a door marked Mr. Ryan. A loud, dictatorial voice boomed, "Come in." As the three callers walked in, Mr. Ryan, who was seated behind his desk, greeted them with a snappy question. "Do you all work here?" "No, we don't," Nancy told him. When he made no attempt to carry on a conversation, she said, "We heard about High Rise's new development plans. I suppose it will bring a lot of new shoppers into town, and that will please you." "I suppose it will," he said evenly. "Are you thinking of applying for jobs in my store when the development opens?" The girls were a bit amused by his assumption, but kept straight faces. Nancy said, "Wouldn't we be a little early to think of that?" "Yes, you would be. Well, what did you come for?" "I can't give you much time. I am a very busy man." Bess assured Mr. Ryan they would not stay long. She turned to Nancy. "Tell him what you have in mind." Mr. Ryan, said Nancy, we've been looking over the area where the apartment buildings may be put. We understand that these will replace Mr. Thurston's zoo and aviary. That's right, the shop owner agreed. Have you ever thought, Nancy asked, how much more attractive the development would be if the Thurston farm were left intact? Mr. Ryan gave a start. What do you mean? Nancy told him that she could visualize the development very clearly. A cluster of high-rise apartment houses would face on a man-made lake. There would be a swimming pool, a park, and a playground. And on the other side of the lake, Mr. Thurston's zoo and aviary as an added attraction. The tenants' children would love to go over there and see the birds and animals and hear Oscar Thurston talk about them. It would be very educational and relaxing for adults, too. The shop owner thought this over a few seconds. Then suddenly a sneering look came over his face. Who sent you here to propose this to me? Nobody, Nancy replied. George and Bess echoed the comment. I don't believe you, Mr. Ryan shouted. Well, the councilman added, I don't care who it was, and you tell him for me to mind his own business. I'll vote exactly the way I want to without any advice from someone else. I've already made up my mind that the Thurston farm must go. He arose from his desk chair and walked to the door. Opening it wide, he glared at the callers and said, You've already taken up too much of my valuable time. I would appreciate your leaving at once. The three girls walked out of the office without saying a word. Then George burst out. What a mean man he is! Bess added, I never met anybody so narrow-minded and pig-headed in all my life. Nancy heaved a great sigh. That certainly was a disappointing interview, but I'm not giving up. I'll call on the other councilmen as soon as I have a chance. She added that there were 3 more. When the girls reached the car, Nancy asked George to drive. I don't know why, but I'm really exhausted. I'll take the car from your house. George dropped her cousin Bess at the Marvin home, then went to her own house. She said goodbye to Nancy and advised her to take a nap or at least go to bed early that evening. Will do, Nancy replied and drove off. After putting her car in the garage, she entered the house through the kitchen door. Hannah Gruen came bustling down the front stairway into the hall to meet her. Oh, Nancy, the housekeeper cried. Ned seems to be much worse. I can't reach either the doctor or your father on the phone. I don't know what to do. She went on. Ned is slightly delirious, and he keeps calling for you, insisting he must see you. I don't know what to do. Instantly, Nancy rushed to the stairway. If Ned wants to see me, he's going to. Hannah Gruen grabbed the girl's arm. Dr. Black and your father told you not to go in that room. I know, Nancy replied sheepishly. I'll stop at the door and call to Ned. The housekeeper released the girl's arm, and Nancy raced up the steps 2 at a time. Oh, Ned, she kept saying to herself, you must get better. End of chapter 10.